I'm going to turn it over to Peter Nelson to get us started.
Thank you. I don't believe there's any administrative matters at this point in time. My understanding is we are at the Township's cross of Mr. Lambert. And unless the parties have any issues, I would say let's get on with it.
I have no issues. I'm ready for cross.
Okay, we're good to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Lambert.
Good evening.
You presented a revised plan. The applicant presented a revised plan. I believe it's marked as A12, and that revised plan is as of January 31st, 2024. Is that correct?
A12 was a plan set that we prepared. We resubmitted sheets 1 through 12. There's other sheets on the cover sheet there that were done by others, which will be submitted under subsequent exhibits. It was originally May 18th, 2023, last revised January 29th, 2024.
That's what I have. Revision 2.
I have 29.
That should be right. Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Oh, the other sheets have a different date. That was the cover sheet.
Yeah, and there were that was the cover sheet date. The exhibit sheet that's up there is sheet 4 of A12.
And maybe that's the more specific question. When was that last revised?
January 31st, 2024.
Great, thank you. Now, you were the engineer for what we've been calling Hamilton 1, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you're obviously familiar with the plan that was submitted a few years ago for conditional use for this property?
Yes, we prepared it several years ago. I don't know if I know every detail at this point, but several years ago.
I understand. I just would like you to go through the major differences, in your opinion, from that plan versus the plan that's on A12 sheet 4.
I probably won't list every one. Just, again, it's been several years since we looked at that plan, and we've looked at different iterations of this plan. As you pointed out, it was a revised plan, so I may conflate what was a revision of this current plan to the old plan. But the original plan that we submitted, Hamilton 1, had, I believe it was 41 units, so it had more units. And as you are aware, that was turned down as part of a conditional use process. We received that decision, and there were comments or conditions in that reasons for denial, and this plan was curative to those. That might be easier. This plan was curative to that. So the layout has been modified. The stormwater management was moved. After that plan, when we had filed that Hamilton 1 plan, the ordinance required, and this is off the top of my head, I believe it was 15% open space, and there was no language about stormwater in the original code. And so Hamilton 1, one of the reasons it was denied was that some of the stormwater was under open space. This plan, by the time we filed it, the township had actually amended their ordinance, increased the open space to require 25%. They added language that the open space needed to be contiguous unless approved by the board, and it provided a limit of 10% of stormwater within the open space. So this plan increased the amount of open space to the 25%. It changed the configuration of the stormwater to keep it out of the open space or limit it to under the 10%. It changed some of the units. I believe it was some of the unit dimensions were changed. So there was many changes to that plan.
Thank you. Have you reviewed the Radnor Township Comprehensive Plan?
Yes, I have over time. I haven't reviewed it recently.
Did you review it for this application?
Yes, when we first looked at this, we reviewed the comprehensive plan.
When did you first look at it?
The comprehensive plan? Or
You just
what-
stated when you first looked at this, you reviewed the comprehensive plan, so.
At the revisions to the plan, so when we originally looked at it, it was prior to Hamilton 1 that we really went through it in depth.
So you didn't review it for this particular application? Is that your testimony?
Not specifically, no, I did not.
You testified, I believe, about a nearby development, and I think everyone in this room is more familiar with it than I am, but the Villa Stratford?
Stratford, correct.
How many homes are there?
I believe there are 11 homes at Villa Stratford.
And are there stormwater issues on that property? Do you know?
I'm not sure what issues, stormwater management features, or I'm not aware, I don't understand your question.
Well, it's pretty clear that there are stormwater issues on or adjacent to this property. I think the neighbors have made that abundantly clear. Are there similar issues on the Villa Stratford property, if you know?
I wasn't involved in that application.
Do you know how this property is, and this development specifically, is similar to that, if at all?
They're both being proposed under the density modification provisions of the ordinance.
Are the townhomes similar in size?
I don't know the exact size of the units at Villa Stratford. As I said, I did not do that application.
Understood.
I believe the density is almost exactly what's proposed here.
And how many townhome communities are within a mile of the proposed townhome community here?
I don't know the exact number. We talked about Villa Stratford remaining within Radnor. There's one on the other side of, if you go up Eagle Road and cross over the railroad, there's a townhouse development on the east side of Eagle Road, just as you cross the railroad bridge. On the other side of Lancaster Avenue, I'm not sure if it's exactly a mile, but on, what would that be, South Wayne Avenue, the former Adelberg Florist, there are townhouses in that location. Across the street from that, I believe it's called Wicklow. There are townhouses there. Roughly across Conestoga Road, there's the Graythorn development. There's a development on Bloomingdale with townhouses. So
And
there's
so,
several around.
understood. If we could just go to the one that you were referring to on the east side of Eagle Road, how many townhomes, if you know?
I do not know that number off the top of my head.
Are there less than 20?
I'm not sure the exact number there. It's an older development.
How about the other side of Lancaster, the South Wayne development?
Which one are you referring to?
You just referred to, I was writing it down, you said the east side of Eagle Road, then you went to a second one, the other side of Lancaster at South Wayne.
So the one at Adelberg Florist, I believe there's 6 townhomes there. Graythorn, I don't know the exact number there. I would guess it's in the proximity of 50. Wicklow is, somewhere around 10. I'd have to look up the exact number.
Fair enough. I'd like to talk about the open space, and certainly we'll be utilizing A12 sheet 4 that's up on the screen. You testified that the open space will be roughly 26%, correct?
Yes, that's what A12 sheet 4 says in the middle of the page.
And where are your calculations for that 26%?
We've identified the area as 84,807 square feet.
Okay, so relative to the entire square footage, that's how you get the 26%?
Correct. We use the net tract size.
And just to clarify, is any of the open space in buffers, any of the buffering?
The open space is not in the buffer.
Is any of it in floodplains or wetlands?
No.
You testified that this open space would be, I believe it was passive open space, was the word you used. Do you remember that?
Yes, that would be accurate description.
Is it going to be used for recreational purposes?
Passive recreation, yes.
What's passive recreation?
Typically, active recreation would be, an athletic event, something along those lines. Something more passive would be, walking through, an open area, through woodland landscaping, being able to go through those open areas.
So not a baseball field, but walking through the trees.
Correct.
And it's not going to be used for a park site, correct?
It would be part of the HOA property.
So you wouldn't call it a park site?
I would call it a park-like site, right? So it has, landscaping in it. It will be, maintained as a park-like setting, but it will be under the ownership of the HOA.
So you're distinguishing between Township Park or something along those lines versus something that's similar in nature but not owned by a township or a municipality?
Yes, I think it has the features of what you would find in a park, but it is not a public park.
And it's obviously not going to be used for school grounds, correct?
That is correct.
Is it going to be used for woodland conservation?
There will be some trees that are preserved in that area, yes.
And how much of it, again, what's the exact percentage that's going to be utilized, of the open space that's going to be utilized for stormwater facilities?
I refer to A12 sheet 4. In the bottom left-hand corner, there's the zoning summary table. The third line from the bottom of the table is the minimum common open space. The far right is the proposed column, and it shows that it's 84,807 square feet, or 26%. And the stormwater management's identified as 6,654 square feet at 7.9%.
And some of these facilities will be under the parking, is that correct? Specifically the parallel parking and the parking in the bottom right-hand corner?
Yes, under the bottom right-hand and bottom left-hand corner of that open space, there are parking spaces that it will be under. But the parking spaces are not included in the open space, if that was your question.
Understood. So the parking, right, and that's shown depicted as the parking spaces are not in dark green, is that correct?
That is correct.
Is it your testimony that each of the 38 townhomes proposed will have access to the open space?
Yes.
And pedestrians will have to cross over Drive A or Drive B to get to that open space if you're in the townhomes on the bottom ring, is that correct?
Yes.
And there was a little bit of testimony about this. I just want to flesh it out a little bit. Will every townhome have a view of the open space?
Generally, yes.
What do you mean generally?
I believe there was extensive testimony that we went through at the last hearing about that some of the units will have not direct views, but they will have views of the open space, looking at an angle to see the open space.
And in your opinion, which of the townhomes would have the hardest time seeing the open space? If you're looking at A12 sheet 4.
I don't think any of them have a hard time seeing the open space.
Well, some of these homes will have a harder time seeing the open space, correct?
No, I think that it's easy to see the open space from any of the units. It's just that some will have a fully unobstructed view. Others will have views that they will have to look at an angle.
Okay, so if we look at back to my microphone. I have my glasses on, and it's hard to see, but the left-hand side, the townhomes down the left-hand side, it's even harder to see on my hard copy. But on the left-hand side there, you have 5 townhomes, correct? What are those numbers?
16 through 20, if you're referring to the ones on the far left of the plan.
Yes. Is townhome 18 in the middle?
Yes.
Would townhome 18 have an easier time seeing the open space than the townhomes that are on the other side of the street, out the back of their property?
I believe you can see it from either one.
Understood. And I understand your testimony is that every townhome will have some site of some portion of the open space. I'm asking if it would be easier for the townhomes, say, on the right side of Drive A than the left side of Drive A.
I think, if you're looking at your window and you're looking to find the open space from either one, you'll be able to find the open space.
I understand that. I'm asking if it's harder for the townhomes on the left.
And my answer was that for both of them, they can both see it. And so when you say harder, easier, maybe I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, if you look out of townhome 18 and you're standing in the driveway, is it easier to see the open space than if you're standing the back of the house on the townhomes on the right-hand side of Drive A?
So if I were seeking to see the open space and I was standing in the driveway of Unit 18, I would look to the bottom of the page from Unit 24, and I would see the open space. Then
Are there any planned accessory structures to be built or erected on the stormwater, the open space that's above the stormwater facilities?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
So if you look at the bottom of the inner loop, so the 2 stormwater facilities, the bottom left-hand side and the bottom right-hand side of the open space. Are you with me there?
Yes.
Are there any plans to have any sort of structures, besides the parking that's there, but talking about the green space area over those stormwater facilities, is there any plan to have any structures over top of those?
No.
In your expert opinion, could you put a gazebo over top?
Over top of?
Of that area we're discussing, where the stormwater facilities are in the bottom left and bottom right of the open space?
No, we wouldn't recommend putting a gazebo directly on top of the stormwater.
And why is that?
For the foundations of the gazebo, if it was just at grade, it would be fine. If you were building a foundation for it, I wouldn't build a foundation over the stormwater system.
Does that go for playground equipment?
There have been instances where playgrounds have been built over them. It depends what type of equipment. Again, it's really about the foundations. If you just have something that's surface mounted, it's not really an issue to the stormwater systems. If you're building a foundation, we would have to modify the stormwater system for some type of playground like that.
So you wouldn't recommend it in this case?
Correct, and none is proposed, just to be clear.
Understood. Are there any sidewalks or public paths within the open space?
There would be a path, it would be a lawn-type path through the open space that is proposed.
So obviously not. It would be pervious.
Correct.
If you were to put decks off the back of the townhomes, and I'm talking about the townhomes on the inner circle, so immediately abutting the open space. If you were to put decks off the back of those townhomes, would they be encroaching into the open space?
As I testified previously, no decks are proposed on the backs of those units. The units are shown as footprints of where they would be. If a deck was going to be built, it would be built within the 56-foot depth of the proposed unit, rather than going outside of that brown footprint.
So is that the white border along the brown footprint? Is that what you're talking about?
No, the white border is an area around the proposed structures to show that we have an area around the units that wouldn't be within the open space. And so we have it's roughly 5 feet. It varies in depth, but roughly 5 feet around the units for, whether that was maintenance activity of the building, that was not within the open space.
So if you were to put a deck off of these townhomes, and again, the townhomes in the inner circle, inner loop, adjacent to the open space immediately, the townhome would have to be reduced in size? Is that what your testimony is?
The footprint of the interior would be changed, yes.
So let's assume we're not going to change what you're showing as the footprint of the interior of the house. Can a deck be put off the back?
If they filled up the entire area that we're showing as envelope, the 36 by 56 with building, there would be no deck beyond that.
That's what's proposed, is filling up that space, correct?
What we're showing is a kind of the maximum build, and so that unit would not have any deck. If they wanted a deck space, you would reduce the actual footprint of the structure, and you'd be able to have a deck within that envelope. We typically do this on townhouse-type developments to provide the maximum build, and so all the improvements are designed for that maximum build, and then when the units are actually individually designed and sold, the depth of that unit may vary.
So people will have a say when they purchase the property, each townhome, each unit, they will be able to have a say in how big the townhome is?
There will be a standard townhouse unit, and then there will be typically options, is how it's usually done. And I'd go back to, kind of the conditional use standard of a generalized plan, right? And I can pull up the language if you want, but
That's fine.
It's a generalized plan for both the engineering and the architecture. What we're showing is the maximum build of a unit that would be proposed. The unit may be smaller than that, and for instance, you were asking about a deck. If you took an 8x8 area out, or 8x10, you might have a 8x10 deck in the back corner rather than having that as interior space.
So for all of us who are looking at A12, sheet 4, just so I understand this correctly, for the commissioners, for the neighbors, for myself, this isn't necessarily the size of the townhomes that are going to be there in the end.
This was the maximum size.
So it's not necessarily what's going to be there in the end.
They could be a smaller footprint, yes.
Okay. Does that testimony, all that testimony about decks and whether it could be built off and how that could be done, does that apply to stairs that would be coming out the back?
Yes, they'd all be within that footprint is the intent.
Understood, because if you took stairs off the back of any of those townhomes in the inner loop, adjacent to the open space, the stairs would be probably going into the open space, correct?
No, I wouldn't agree. We have 5 feet there. If we talked about how the units are set, and we could start looking at the grading plan to analyze, but some units may only need one step out, which would not be within the open space.
And what about pavers? Does the testimony apply to that if there was someone wanted to do pavers off the back?
All of the testimony that we provided is that the buildable area of that unit is within that footprint. We do not propose to build beyond the footprint which is shown on the plan.
So I guess I just want to drill down and just make sure I understand, though. If it's built out completely, which is what you show on A4 sheet 12, correct?
Correct. We show a full unit plan, yes.
Then you cannot have decking coming off the back.
Correct. You would not be exceeding that footprint.
And you cannot have pavers if they were beyond the 5 feet, that white strip there.
Correct.
Okay. Looking at A12 sheet 4 still, can you just point out the setbacks for us? What the setbacks are on the, we'll just say the left-hand side, the bottom of the sheet, and the right-hand side along Eagle Road.
So when you refer to the left-hand side, you're referring to the Grant Lane
Correct.
side of the property. So on that side, we've provided a 30-foot rear yard. On the, I'll refer to just kind of plan south towards the shopping center, we have a 25-foot perimeter setback along the shopping center. Along Eagle Road and Stratford Road are 40-foot setbacks.
Do you recall in Hamilton 1, the first conditional use application the developer brought before this board, that the rear yard setback was 30 feet along the, when I say rear yard, what is the rear yard that you, what are you calling the rear yard?
As I just stated, we called the rear yard along Grant Lane.
Okay.
I believe my testimony went through before that during the Planning Commission meeting, the township engineer had said we needed a rear yard, although the ordinance provisions suggest otherwise, that we just need a perimeter setback and no internal yards. It was said that we needed a rear yard, so we have shown a rear yard adjacent to the Grant Lane neighbors.
So there's a rear yard, and then there's a side yard perpendicular to it and a side yard parallel to it, correct?
No, there's, because we're a corner lot, we have one rear and one, it would be a perimeter setback.
And what was the setback, if you remember, for in Hamilton 1 along the shopping center?
I don't recollect.
Understood. If you increase the setbacks on any of those three sides, you would have to move the townhomes, correct?
Along the Grant Lane side, since we provided the larger 30-foot rear yard on that side, we would have to move it, those units. The units along the shopping center, so the plan south, would not need to be moved. And then the same goes for changing the front yards, where we have room between the rear of the units and the setback line. So, no, we wouldn't have to remove all the units.
So along the Grant Lane side, yes, but not along the shopping center line.
Correct, because we had provided that 30-foot, that extra 5 feet on that side already.
So if you have a 5 foot of wiggle room, for lack of a better term. Is that your testimony?
Again, I'm not sure where you're referring to that 5 feet.
Along the bottom side, along the shopping center, you're saying you would not have to move the townhomes because you have an extra 5 feet of setback. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct, and it's dimensioned on the plan, sheet A12, sheet 4.
If you decrease the size of the townhomes, you could increase the size of the open space, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
If you decrease the proposed size of the townhomes, you could increase the size of the open space, correct?
Theoretically, yes.
And the buffering on the Grant Lane side and the shopping center in Eagle, well, let's just start with Grant Lane. Is the buffering, landscape buffering, is there any other proposed buffering or screening?
Ken, I'm not following your question.
if someone lives on Grant Lane and they're looking towards this property, would they be seeing the townhomes, or would there be screening or some sort of natural buffering?
There's a there's a 25-foot buffer along that property line. So the 25-foot buffer goes along all residentially zoned properties. It goes along the Grant Lane, along both sides of the forest parcel, and then there's one additional parcel on Forest Lane that the buffer goes around that parcel. The buffer's not required along the commercial frontage.
Understood. So you're talking
Commercial
about,
line.
okay, when you say buffer, what are you referring to?
I'm referring to, and I'll pull up the ordinance section just so we can have it. So it's 280-91G, which says there shall be a buffer of 25 feet along all property lines which abut residentially zoned districts, which shall not contain any road structures, parking areas, et cetera, and shall be planted in accordance with a plan which shall be approved by the Board of Commissioners at the time of final approval. This buffer strip shall not be counted as part of the common open space.
So I understand, so the buffering, you're talking about the space between the houses and the townhomes, the houses on Grant Lane and the townhomes?
I'm referring to the 25 feet along the property lines which abut residentially zoned districts.
Understood. Is there going to be any artificial screening, or, and I think you have a landscape architect who's going to talk about the trees. Are there going to be trees in that area?
As you said, the landscape architect will be addressing those comments.
Is there going to be any artificial screening beyond the trees?
I don't know what artificial screening is. but
Fencing?
I'd defer that to the landscape architect.
Fair enough. How many, and I believe you testified to this, Mr. Lambert, but it has been a few weeks. How many parking spaces do you believe are required for this development?
So in the bottom center of A12 sheet 4, there's a parking summary table. There are 2 spaces per dwelling unit required, and there's 38 units, so there's 76 parking spaces required. And then the 255-29A20 has a requirement for overflow off-street parking at 1 space per 4 units. So that's an additional 9.5, and 10 are proposed.
And the garages are being used to calculate the parking, is that correct? Some of that parking?
Yes, we have included a 2-car garage in each unit.
And the driveways are not being used to calculate that parking, correct?
Correct. Although they're of sufficient size to meet the requirement, we have not included them in that count.
Understood. I want to talk about the dimensions of the driveways. I know you've testified to this, but I don't think I just want to be clear. What is your testimony as to what the dimensions are for each driveway? Is it the same for each townhome?
Obviously not, because the geometry of, units 1, 2, 3, there's 15, 13, 12, right? There's different lengths. But however, there's a minimum of 19 by 20 for each unit.
That minimum, is that for the townhomes that have the 2 feet facade going to, there's a staggered facade, correct?
Correct.
And so some are 2 feet further out than others?
Correct.
So is this 19 by 20, is it your testimony that that minimum is for the townhomes that have the 2 feet facade coming out?
It will be for all the units. The garage door itself for those will be recessed as part of the architecture.
And what are the dimensions of the garages?
I don't have the exact architectural layouts. There will be a minimum of 19 by 20 provided within the garage for the parking spaces.
And what are the dimensions of the opening of the garages?
I'm not the architect, I don't have the opening itself.
So the architect would have that?
A architect, yes.
If one had two SUVs, would they fit into the garages as proposed?
Yes, they're, the spaces inside are 9.5 by 20, which is the, township requirement for a parking space.
And so that would fit, your testimony is two SUVs could fit in those?
In the 9.5 by 20, yes.
And what are the dimensions, I'm going to talk about, I want to talk about Drive A and Drive B. And I have a number of questions about that, but what are the dimensions of Drive A and Drive B?
When you say dimension, you mean width?
Width.
It's a 28-foot width.
Can you point out townhomes 1 and 2? Where are they on the
They're in the bottom right corner.
right-hand corner? And how would one pull into those driveways? If they pulled in to park, they would have to back out, correct?
Yes,
And if they're backing out onto Drive B, correct?
that is correct, yes.
And have you done, those are curved driveways, correct?
They are curved, yes.
Have you shown on any of the documents you provided the radius for that turn?
I do not believe that radius is shown, but it's a gentle radius for a passenger vehicle.
A gentle radius. So it's your testimony that it would be safe to pull out of the parking spots or the driveways in townhome 1 and 2?
Yes.
How far apart are each driveway from the other? Let's take the ones on the bottom.
Which,
The bottom,
can you be more specific?
yeah, along the commercial property on the bottom of
Yeah,
A12.
which, there's varying widths.
So I have my cursor over a townhome. Do you see that? Which townhome is that?
So you're looking at the one on the, using words, it was unit 12, it's on the bottom left. It's the leftmost unit on the shopping center side of the property, is that correct?
Correct. And what is the distance between that driveway and the unit to its right?
I do not have that exact dimension. Eyeballing it, you're probably 15 feet or so.
And is that consistent, or they vary throughout all these townhomes, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that on the high side of the distance between the driveways, or are other driveways further apart?
It just depends on the orientation.
What do you mean by that?
If the driveways are kind of closer together or further apart.
If you look at the lower left-hand side, let's talk about the parking on the lower left-hand side of the open space. So this is the parallel parking on the curve.
Yes.
Is it your testimony that these parallel parking spaces would be rectangular in shape?
It would be, I guess it would technically be trapezoidal, right? The shortest distance along the curb line with a little longer distance out because it's along a curve.
And what are the dimensions of each of these parking spots?
They're shown as 9 by 22.
So they're 9 by 22, but they're not necessarily a rectangle because of the curve, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And have you done any sight lines analysis if one were to be pulling out of those parallel parking spots into Drive A?
We didn't do site triangles there, but it's a very limited distance. You would be able to see, both down, both sections of Drive A pulling out of those spaces.
So if a car is traveling on Drive B onto Drive A, and so the parallel parking would now be on the right, your testimony is if someone's pulling out of those parallel parking spaces, they would be able to see safely see cars coming from that direction?
Yes.
And how wide are the sidewalks? The sidewalk that's on the inner loop, there's one sidewalk along Drive A, Drive B, correct?
Correct. So Exhibit A 12, Sheet 4 identifies the sidewalk as 5 feet.
Is it your testimony that the sidewalks, that sidewalk complies with ADA standards?
Yes.
Can you show me how a person in a wheelchair would get from that sidewalk over to the open space?
You could, a couple different layers. One, you could cross at the where the driveway reaches Stratford Avenue, and to be able to go into the space, and then you would be able to just cross and go into that open space at any number of locations.
So if someone was coming from the shopping center and using the sidewalk that cuts between two townhomes at the bottom, they would have to go up to Stratford along the sidewalk to get to the open space?
They could, yes.
They could, or is there another way?
They could cross. You know, it's a very technical question you're asking. Typically, something like this would be handled in land development. If we were looking at this, we could provide a curb cut on the other side. There are no proposed paved walkways through that open space, so it would be a grass surface. But if we needed a wheelchair ramp to get into that grass surface, we could easily provide that. Again, it's very, you're kind of 12 steps beyond our design when you're asking. It's very technical.
So it hasn't been designed yet?
That ADA access to the open space has not been designed as of this time.
If there was a sidewalk on the other side of Drive A and Drive B, your answer could have been, correct me if I'm wrong, they could cross at a crosswalk from the outer loop, the outer sidewalk along Drive A, Drive B, cross safely along a crosswalk to a sidewalk on the inner loop of Drive A, Drive B. That could have been your testimony, correct, if there was a sidewalk there?
No, I don't think it would be my testimony. That's, you're, suggesting a different design than what's proposed. You're suggesting we would have had that at this juncture. We don't have that design at this time for ADA accessibility, which I'm not even sure is required for that open space, but I'd want to investigate that. But if it were required under the codes, whether the township or federal guidelines, we would be able to address that. And as I said, it's typically would be during either land development or permitting to provide that level of detail.
I think the only thing I'm suggesting is that your plan, as it is shown right now, which is what's before this board, is not as safe for someone in a wheelchair than it could be if it had a sidewalk on the inner loop. That's what I'm suggesting. Do you not agree with that?
I don't agree with that.
Have you provided a loading zone in the development?
No, we have not.
Have you provided for a location for excess snow removal?
There's areas on the site that can accommodate snow removal. There's, for instance, I believe we went through this, in between, units, 15 and 16, we would have an area for snow removal. In between the driveway for Unit 1 and Unit 38, there's an area to accumulate snow. In front of Unit 5, there's an area to accumulate snow. And we do have a 28-foot wide cartway for them to be able to, maneuver that snow.
If someone's living in a townhome between two other townhomes and they want to clear their driveway of snow, where are they going to push it?
I lived in a condo for a long time. Everything, I guess, was really up to the HOA. Typically, the driveways would be shoveled by the HOA in a development like this, and so they would be, it would be contracted and be shoveled individually.
And
or plowed.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lambert. Go ahead.
They would be shoveled or plowed, and on either side of the driveway, just like I do at the driveway of my house, is, you know, you would be able to put snow on either side.
So it's your testimony there's enough space in between a driveway. If you're living between two townhomes, there's enough space between the driveways to your left and right to push that snow?
Yes. And I believe I testified previously is if you do get a extreme snow event, you know, oftentimes the HOA arranges for the snow to be removed, right? Is if you have 30 inches of snow, oftentimes that snow actually gets removed off-site. At least that's what my former HOA did.
Are there any paths, we talked about ADA accessibility, but are there any paths specifically for anyone across Drive A or Drive B to the open space from the outer sidewalk?
This is a very low, you know, a low volume driveway within a community. It's easily, you know, we're not crossing Montgomery Avenue or Lancaster Avenue. We're crossing kind of an internal driveway to a community. And you'd be able to cross at any number of areas.
But there are no paths, correct?
It's all paved, right? So if you're referring to a paved surface, we have a paved surface in the whole driveway.
Is there any crosswalks over that paved surface?
We have not striped any crosswalks across that paved surface.
Where will the residents place their trash?
Trashes will be held in the garage itself, and then there's a private hauler that would come collect it.
So the private hauler would have to collect it from the garage?
My understanding is actually they do. I was actually surprised at that, that they get access. Either that or it would be placed outside, you know, at the kind of the end of the driveway corner, and be collected just like any normal development.
Can you note where the sewer lines would be on? Would this be the best place to look for the sewer lines, A12 sheet 4?
I believe sheet 5 may be a better option.
Can you note where the sewer lines are on sheet 5 of A12?
So generally, the sewer lines are underneath Drive A and Drive B. They then exit Drive A between units 12 and 13, and it goes behind unit 13 and then out to Forest Lane to connect to the public sewer.
So there'll be a need for an easement for that connection, correct?
I'm sorry, when you say that connection, what are you referring to?
Off of, I believe you just said Forest Lane.
It would be within the public right-of-way, and it would be part of the parcel, so I'm not sure what easement you're referring to.
And what about the stormwater lines? Can you point those out?
So there are many stormwater lines throughout the property. It's the lines that have the ST on them. There's a series of inlets, stormwater pipes. There's stormwater pipes around, directly adjacent to the buildings, collecting roof drains. There are 5 underground stormwater facilities that are identified as PCSM, BMP, you know, various bed numbers on this plan. You know, it's throughout the property really is the stormwater.
And specifically, if the bottom left-hand corner, there's the parcel that used to have a house in previous plans that no longer has the house that's been removed, correct?
Correct.
And if we're looking at that stormwater line, there's a stormwater line on that property, correct?
Yes, there's a small stormwater basin on that property along with the stormwater line, yes.
And how close is that stormwater line from the sanitary sewer line on that property?
I have to check the exact dimension. Eyeballing it, I believe it was, you know, again, I'm just eyeballing it. It's probably 10 or 15 feet.
With the path that's leading between the two townhomes in the bottom right-hand corner onto the shopping center, would that require an easement as well?
No.
How many structures are currently on the property?
Can you bring up sheet 2, I believe?
Sure.
So when you say structures, I'm going to refer to building structures? Is that what you're
That is what I'm referring to, building
referring to?
structures.
Let me count. So this is sheet 812, sheet 2. Looks like there's 10 approximately, plus the house on Forest, which would be 11.
And of those 11 structures, how many are houses?
There are 2 main houses. There are other structures that included dwellings.
And have you consulted with the Radnor Historical and Architectural Review Board to confirm any historic significance for this site or any of those houses?
I have not.
Do you know if the applicant has it all?
I don't believe so, and I don't believe it's a requirement of the ordinance.
Understood. You testified that development on this property would not be impacted by strong prevailing winds. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Just want to be clear, Mr. Lambert, you're not an expert in meteorology, correct?
I am not an expert in meteorology.
Just making sure. And you also testified as to seasonal temperatures at this property and not being an issue with the proposed development, but do you remember that?
I do, and that was in reference to current building codes addressing seasonal temperatures. I've lived, in this region my entire life, so with modern-day insulation and HVAC, that was really addressing the seasonal temperatures.
But you have no numbers or analysis to back up that testimony, correct?
I do not.
I'd like to talk about vehicular access to the site and within the site. Trucks would have to get into Drive A or Drive B, trucks would have to swing into the oncoming lanes on Stratford. Is that correct?
Can you be more specific about what truck you're referring to?
If there's a fire truck and it's coming up from the Grant Lane side and it wants to take a right onto Drive B, it would have to swing into the other lane, correct?
Yes, it's really a function of, Stratford is a relatively narrow street, that we would be able to make that maneuver, which would not be uncommon for a fire truck.
And there will be 2 access points for fire trucks, correct?
Both Drive A and Drive B access Stratford Avenue, yes.
And have you discussed with the fire marshal whether 2 access points is sufficient?
I have not.
Has anyone for the applicant, to your knowledge?
We have not. We recently did another project in Radnor. Had, let's see here, about 300 units, and used one main driveway access for that.
The turn radius for Drive B is sharper than the turn radius for Drive A, correct? If we're looking at the turns at the bottom of the development, bottom right-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner?
That is correct.
Why is that?
It was really just design, looking at how the units laid out, how the development would be organized.
Well, if you soften that turn radius on Drive B, it would be going into the open space, correct?
Yes, if we changed the drive radius, it would change the open space in that area.
Have you provided a turn radius for the largest UPS truck that would be entering this development?
We have not, but it would fall kind of in a subset of the 2 vehicles that we did provide for this site.
And that would be your testimony for a FedEx truck,
Yes,
Postal Service truck?
yes.
Garbage.
They have all much tighter turning radiuses than the vehicles that we demonstrated can safely maneuver through the site.
Could you go over again the improvements you're going to be making to Stratford? If any.
So we would be providing a curb and sidewalk along Stratford.
Between drives A and drive B?
When you say between, I just want to understand what you're referring to.
You have drive A on the left-hand side and drive B on the right-hand side, and you have Stratford running perpendicular to that. So if you go out drive A
Yes.
and you take a right, are you providing sidewalk and curbing along Stratford heading towards drive B?
Yes, that was the intent.
Until a few months ago, you were calling drive A and drive B roads, correct?
Yes, we had nomenclature on the plan that referred to it as road. You brought up Hamilton 1. You know, we had, I believe, the same nomenclature then of road. And at that time that we submitted Hamilton 1, we had engineers' reviews, things like that. And it was never brought up that the nomenclature on the plan would confuse and make it considered a street versus a driveway. During Hamilton 2, or the current application, we submitted the plans, received a review letter from the same consultants that we did for Hamilton 1, and brought up different issues that they didn't bring up previously. So it seemed like it was just a different interpretation of this plan than the first plan. And in that new review, it was brought up suggesting that it should be considered a street versus a driveway, and I believe that it was really just from the nomenclature that was causing the issue, so that's why we renamed it to drive versus road.
And when did that change take place?
I don't recall the exact iteration of which it was, when it was, but it was after we submitted and before now.
So since last May and before now?
Correct. It was again, it was after we received the reviews, saw the reviews. I believe it was creating some confusion, so to limit the confusion, we've relabeled them.
Have you provided, in any of your exhibits, sight lines for ingress and egress from drive A or drive B? You did provide those sight lines.
Yes, we did.
And if you move drive B further from Eagle than where it is now, would that impact the sight lines?
Not substantively, no.
Would it impact the distance to the townhomes?
I'm not sure it would. I'm not sure I understand your question.
So if you moved drive B further from Eagle, so to the left, would it be further from townhomes or the same kind of distance? How would it change the proposal?
You're talking about a different plan. That's not the plan ahead of us. You know, we can change all of the buildings and units, but that's not what we're proposing, right? So I don't really understand your question.
Sure.
When you're asking me to move one element on a plan, other elements may move, they may not move. We'd have to look at different configurations. There's other things to consider. It's not a static environment.
You all brought in a plan, another plan, correct? For I think it's Exhibit 4. That's a completely different plan, correct?
That was we've referred to as the neighbor plan. The applicant met with neighbors. Neighbors asked for various things. That plan was responsive to the neighbor comments. It did not necessarily meet the codes. I believe it was in the purview of the board to approve it, but it was not meeting the code requirements that this plan meets.
Understood, and we'll circle back to that. So I'm asking, you brought in a totally new plan, potentially hypothetical, that maybe this board could allow for. I'm just asking you to change one thing. If you moved drive B a little further away from Eagle, how would that change this plan?
I haven't drawn that plan, right? So you're asking me to move one thing. I don't know what else. Are you asking me to move everything? Are you asking me to move one thing? Are you
What-
asking me to move, like, I don't understand what you want me to move, right? If I left the buildings exactly where they were and moved Road B on top of them, Road B would be on top of the buildings. If that's what you're asking, I don't really understand your question.
Well, it wouldn't be on top of the buildings. You would move the buildings to the left, correct?
Potentially, or you could reconfigure the buildings. There's different design solutions.
Let me ask you this. If you have Drive B and you move it further from Eagle Road, it's going to cut down on the open space, correct?
It potentially modifies the open space, yes, because we have the open space touching Drive B.
Right. And are there any hydrants, fire hydrants provided on this plan?
We haven't gotten to that level of design.
So there's no fire hydrants on this plan?
Correct. That would be, typically either during final plan or potentially even post-final plan that we would look at that. So that's, again, much later. I go back, you're asking very, technical, detailed questions, and I go back to kind of the general standard of, 280-135C. A generalized site plan shall be submitted as part of any conditional use application. It is not intended that such plan be engineered or contain fixed architectural layout, such as would be required under 255, right? So a lot of your questions are really directed to a much further, developed plan. I'd say most of your questions have been very technical, questions of it. I understand, and I'm trying to answer them, but, something like a fire hydrant, there's many different locations that you could put it. It's much later in the process.
You testified the height of each unit would be 35 feet, correct?
I believe it was, yes, less than 35 feet. It was, the ordinance requirement was 35.
Is that shown on the plans for any of the units?
So in the zoning summary table on A12 sheet 4, left-hand side, second to the bottom line says a maximum building height with the ordinance sections. The requirement's 35 feet. The proposed is less than or equal to 35 feet.
And so that's for each unit specifically. You're capturing that in what you just testified to?
Yes, we've asserted that the units will be less than 35 feet.
And you talked a little while ago about the recess of some of the townhomes of 2 feet. It's your testimony that this plan reflected on A12 sheet 4 is in conformance with the code regarding the facade and the setback of 2 feet, the staggering.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about stormwater a little bit. Once the development is finished, is it going to be the HOA that maintains the stormwater facilities?
Yes.
And if there was any issue with the stormwater facilities at any point in the future, there would have to be earth disturbance, obviously, within the open space to get to at least 2 of the basins, correct?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. In the future, if there's any issues with the basins, any backups or anything of that sort, to get to those facilities, you'd have to disturb earth within the open space, specifically for the basins in the bottom left-hand and right-hand corner of the open space. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. You might be able to jet clean them. There's other maintenance activities that you may be able to do.
But it could lead to earth disturbance of the open space, correct?
And that is one possibility, yes.
And there is natural stormwater management on the site at this time, correct? Mature trees?
Can you repeat your question?
Sure.
It was worded funny. I got a couple words in there.
Sure. There is natural stormwater management on the site currently, correct?
I wouldn't refer to the vegetation there as natural stormwater management. There's about 2 acres of impervious that runs off there. There's no engineered stormwater basins or anything like that on the property that I'm aware of.
But there are mature trees, obviously, correct?
Yep, there's some mature trees, there's some over-mature trees that are dead. And as I said, there's lots of impervious.
If we could, Commissioners, if we could just take a 5-minute break? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Thank you.
So we'll reconvene at 7:45.
but it can't be good for the teeth.
The blue teeth look good on camera.
You're the only township that gives out Jolly Ranchers. That's quite a perk. Yeah. Part of the application fee. Yeah.
I'm ready.
All right, we'll get started again.
Yes, Mr. Lambert, I just have a few more questions about stormwater. Do your plans specifically show how the stormwater is collected off of each townhome? You've testified to that. Does this show it on the plans?
Yes.
And where is that, sir?
So if you could pull up sheet 5, 812 sheet 5. There's a line that's roughly along the perimeter of the structures that shows an ST line. That's referring to a stormwater line. It's called out in various locations of varying in size, but some of them call out roof drain, 6-inch PVC pipe with cleanouts, changes in grade and direction, typical. Really just around the perimeter of the building, perimeter of the buildings, and then it connects to the stormwater management facilities.
And are manholes shown?
We have inlets shown. Just see here. We have sanitary sewer manholes shown. Most of the stormwater is collected through, the structures that we have are inlets. We'd have to look specifically, I'd have to double check specifically if we have any manholes, but we were doing a lot of it through inlet structures.
Fair enough. And the stormwater piping, is it consistent? I think there's 5 basins, correct?
Correct.
And is the piping between those basins the same size, or does it differ throughout the property?
It'll vary. We have it all, again, an initial design here. As we've talked about extensively, we have land development, permitting, everything else after that, which will, continue to refine the designs.
Understood. And will there be basements for these townhomes?
Yes.
Will the basements be, you testified a little while ago this evening that the townhomes could change in size and dimension, correct?
Correct.
And so the basements, can you tell us what the size and dimension of those basements will be, or is that going to be
No.
specific to the townhome? Okay. How far down will the basements go? I think that may be consistent for each townhome, correct?
No.
It will not?
I do not know.
You don't know how far down the basements will go?
Correct.
Okay. Will they go further than 10 feet?
I don't know. If previous testimony, I believe one of the commissioners asked, we hypothesized different dimensions, and we came up with a rough dimension that it was likely going to be under 10 feet.
And will those dimensions count towards the square footage?
Square footage of,
The entire home? There's been testimony that there are going to be 3,000 square foot townhomes.
correct, that was on the, above grade levels.
But the basement could be considered square footage if it meets certain requirements, correct?
I believe the realtors and assessors all look at that differently. I'm not a realtor nor an assessor.
Will there be more earth disturbance during the construction of these townhomes with the basements compared to if there weren't basements?
Again, I don't understand your question.
Will there be more earth disturbance during this construction because there will be basements constructed than if there weren't basements constructed?
No.
I want to bring up another exhibit here for you. Oh, boy. Are we right? You testified to stormwater infiltration testing on the property, correct?
Yes,
Do you
we said
remember?
we had it completed.
And is it your testimony now that you follow the methodology consistent with the PADEP BMP manual?
Yes.
And you testified that you went 10 feet down to find the limiting zone, correct?
I believe generally the excavation was down to 10 feet. I'd have to double check the exact numbers. But yes, we went down beyond the bottom of the basins to verify limiting zones.
And is it your testimony that you never hit the water table in your testing?
We did not hit the, any groundwater table.
And when were these tests performed?
– 2019.
So the 2019 was when these tests were performed, so they were performed for the conditional use in Hamilton 1, is that correct?
Yes,
And they're the most recent tests?
they are, yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to what I brought up on the screen. It's A13, it's page 180. The triangles and the circles in the middle, in the two rectangles towards the top of the page. What do those represent, Mr. Lambert?
They were, the triangles and circles refer to the test pits and then the permeability locations.
And what kind of tests did you do at those sites?
I did not do any test at those sites.
Do you know what tests were done at that site?
Gulf permeameter tests were done at those sites. Gulf permeameter.
Were double ring tests done at that site?
They were not.
When you testified that the infiltration testing was sufficient for this property and for this development, did you take into account, during that testimony, were you taking into account the 4 tests that are in that rectangle, the triangle and the circles that are within the 2 rectangles at the top?
So as I explained before, we, have brought these plans further along than a typical conditional use. We've done other conditional uses with a lot less stormwater and a lot less testing completed and modeling. We did this in response to, neighbor concerns, looking at the site. But yes, we took all the different testing across the site into consideration in our design.
So specifically, those 4 test sites that I'm referring to in those rectangles were part of your testimony stating that it was sufficient testing?
We tested in many locations throughout the site, taking a look at the different soil conditions. We took all the testing we did into consideration when we, did our stormwater designs.
I'd like to draw your attention to A12, sheet 4 again, and the bed number 5, which I believe is in the bottom left-hand corner, correct?
Yes, bed number 5 is in the Forest Lane parcel.
And this basin collects from beds 1, 2, and 3, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And what is the area of that basin?
I don't know the area offhand.
Do you know the width offhand?
Not offhand, but I can look it up if we need to.
Is the width of that basin narrower than the width of the other basins?
Yes.
Significantly narrower?
Yes.
Is there more likely to be a blockage in a narrower system or a wider system?
The systems are made out of the same type of system, right? So it's these were proposed as a storm brick system, which has a large void area throughout the entire system.
95%, right?
Something along those lines, yes.
So my question was, is it more likely for there to be a backup in a narrower system or a wider system?
Typically, the systems themselves don't back up. If you're referring to that, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by backup, but typically those systems, the beds themselves, as long as they're maintained, do not back up.
Well, I think what a lot of folks have expressed concern about is a large storm comes along, the system can't handle it, and it backs up. That's what I mean by backup. I'm trying not to be too technical with you, but when I say backup, I mean water rises in these basins and it backs up to the other basins. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. I'm not sure. I'd almost rather you be more technical so I could understand your question.
If a failure in the system occurs, how will the residents be notified?
I don't understand your question. If a failure in the system occurs, can you repeat? I'm not really following.
Actually, can we go back to that last question?
Sure.
I would be interested, what happens if the system overflows, that its capacity is reached, and we have a 500-year storm and it cannot handle it? Where does that water go?
The water will continue to run downhill. So if you reach that 500-year storm, which just for the record, I would point out is beyond what is required by the ordinance, the water will run just like all the other water in the area across the surface, right? And you will have surface flow throughout the entire area when you have that 500-year storm.
Towards the houses on Grant Lane?
Downhill, right? So we will be, there is anywhere where it's running downhill at that, again, we're talking about this hypothetical 500-year storm, which is beyond the purview of the code. That water will run downhill, yes.
Towards Forest Lane?
Forest Lane is downhill of the site, so yes, water will run downhill.
Just to be clear, the reason I'm asking, again, I don't live here, everybody else does. They know, but also we're trying to develop a record that this board, a complete record for this board. So downhill towards Grant, downhill towards Forest, downhill towards Eagle as well?
Anywhere where the grade is lower than higher, it will run toward the lower side, is where the water will run.
Do the Grant Lane houses have basements?
I do not know.
Do the Forest Lane houses have basements?
I do not know.
And Mr. Nelson asked about a large storm that causes a backup, and you testified water would simply run downhill. And so that's where I was going with a backup or a failure. How will the residents be notified if that happens?
Residents would be notified through their HOA, just like any other, property owner.
Can you explain what freeboard means relative to these basins?
Typically, freeboard's the amount. Freeboard's typically used for an above-grade basin when people refer to freeboard, and it's the volume or the area above the 100-year storm event.
And are these basins above grade?
No.
So you don't believe that freeboard is relevant to these basins?
Their basin has a volume. There's, they're modeled through the stormwater of how much water is getting there. It models it to make sure that the basin has capacity, and then it has a discharge point where the water runs out.
So again, I just want to be clear. So do you believe that the concept of, or the concept of freeboard applies here or not?
Typically not.
So I just want to be clear. I'm sorry. Typically not. That makes me think you're talking in generalities. For these specific basins on this specific site, does it apply?
No.
It's true that the beds 1, 2, and 3 all go through 5. We talked about that. And then it exits off the property in stormwater facilities under Forest Lane. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what is the overall contributing drainage area to bed 5?
I'd have to look up the exact numbers.
If you have it, I mean.
It might take me some time, but.
Well, let me ask this, Mr. Lambert. Is there a reasonable margin of error if one of the basins leading to 5 failed? We talked about, I think, 1, 2, and 3 lead into 5?
Yes.
If one of those fails, do you believe, is it your testimony that there's a reasonable margin of error, meaning that the other systems will not fail?
Yes, I believe that having multiple systems provides redundancy.
I want to go back to Basin 5 and the width of it. Is the reason you had to make Basin 5 that thin because of the nature of the parcel that it's on?
Yes.
If you had not used that parcel, but used some other part of the property for that basin, would have taken up space that otherwise would be used for a townhome or for open space?
We originally did not have that basin, as you're aware from the previous plans. We added that basin in response to, neighbor concerns. We actually included the extra basin down there.
You mentioned you're using storm bricks for the stormwater facilities, correct?
That is the current design, yes.
And that there's void space, and I believe it's 95 is what I saw in the documents. Does that sound correct to you?
Yes.
Is there any supporting data within the documents that reflects or shows how you got to that 95% void space?
It's the manufacturers. They have their technical specifications providing that volume.
So would that be found on their website, or that's what's been provided to you?
That's what's been provided to you. To us, I'm sure it's probably can be found on their website.
I want to point out the infiltration systems on A12 and their proximity to the townhomes. If you look at bed 1, can you describe where bed 1 is on?
Bed 1 is in the near the intersection of Drive A and Drive B, roughly underneath the 5 parking spaces and some of the open space and some of the drive.
What is the distance between bed 1 and townhome 28?
I don't have an exact dimension. It appears about 20 feet.
Are these dimensions shown anywhere on the plans that you know of?
I don't believe so.
If you look at bed 2, which is between townhome 25 and 24, bottom left-hand corner of the open space, what is the approximate distance from bed 2 to townhome 25?
That one looks a little further, probably 25 or 30 feet.
If we're looking at bed 3, which is behind 15, 14, and 13, townhome 15, 14, and 13, how close is that to the townhomes, 15, 14, and 13?
Again, I'd have to approximate, but I'd say 20, 25 feet.
And let's go over to bed 4. How close is bed 4 to townhome 2?
20 feet plus.
And going back to 3, how close is bed 3 to Mr. Chawla's property, Mr. and Mrs. Chawla's property on Grant Lane? It's immediately to the left.
It appears it's 35 feet or so.
And if we go to bed 5, how close is that to Mr. Shuta's house?
Looks about from his house or from his property line?
From his property line.
From the property line, again, it's probably 30 to 35 feet.
You testified previously that groundwater can flow a different direction from surface topography. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you have any calculations to determine that?
No.
Board's indulgence. I put up on the screen what's been marked as A15 Sheet 2. Do you have any calculations to show the change in the drainage boundary from Sheet 2, from Sheet 1 to this sheet?
Can you repeat your question?
Sure. There's Sheet 1. This is
A15A and A15B is what you're referring to, I believe.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. So are there any calculations? You have changes in, what do the colors show us on 15A?
15A show 4 different colors of different areas, a pink, a green, a purple, and a teal. The teal, which was area 4, shows the area on the subject parcel, or predominantly on the subject parcel. And then it has the other areas. It's really just showing a drainage area, as I testified to before, based on publicly available LiDAR information.
And then if you go to 15B, what's that showing?
That is showing the proposed plan and proposed drainage areas, modification to the existing drainage areas and how that would be controlled.
And do you have any calculations in any of the documents that have been presented to show the change from 15A to 15B?
It's really our proposed stormwater system is the major modification to the teal color.
So you don't have calculations to show the difference?
We do. It's our stormwater A13.
A13? Did you use for this exhibit from 15A to 15B, did you use the pre-development pervious condition as meadow, and that's been discussed and defined previously?
No, as I previously talked about, we looked at the purpose of this exhibit was not following the code. It was looking at actual conditions, so we were not looking at fictitious conditions in this analysis.
Are you implying that the code is fictitious?
Yes.
Want to point out 15B, there's inlets up on Stratford, correct?
Correct.
And those inlets, if you look at the one, it's hard to see, but there's an inlet up towards Drive B, correct? Kind of like on the curve off of Stratford going on to B.
Yes.
If that inlet was, let's say, on Stratford and not on a curve, it would collect water better, correct?
It depends where the water's running and how you're collecting it, but I don't necessarily agree.
Well, there would be curbing along Stratford, correct?
There's curbing where the inlet's proposed.
But some of the water would keep going. If it's running down Stratford towards Grant, some of the water would keep running. Not all the water would turn around the curve and go into the inlet, correct?
Again, can you repeat that?
Sure. Water's running along Stratford, going towards Grant, along the curb, and then there's a curve into Drive B. And are you testifying that all the water along Stratford would go towards that inlet that's on that curve, or would some of it just keep going down towards Grant?
So the grade along Stratford, according to the LiDAR, is higher, and the road pitches toward Grant almost for the entire length of that section. So if you look at A15A, you can see the pink area goes much closer to the intersection of Stratford and Eagle Road. And so our on-site stormwater system is picking up a section of that prior to it getting to, further down toward Grant and collecting it and controlling it as part of our stormwater system.
I understand. I'm trying to get to if that inlet was just a few feet over on the straightaway on Stratford instead of on the curve, it would collect more of the water because it would go right into it as opposed to turning the corner.
I think it's the water, the grading there is going to turn the corner and get into that inlet.
Fair enough. Going back to Basin 5, if we could just.
I think you just click on the tab.
Yeah, man, thank you. Just go back to Basin 5. You testified it's going to go into Forest Lane. That's where this is Basin 5 exits into, correct? Into the stormwater under Forest Lane?
Correct. The outflow pipe flows into the existing collection system on Forest Lane.
And have you determined if that existing pipe has sufficient capacity for this on-site flow?
We're going to be reducing both the rates and volume reaching that point. So we're actually reducing the flow to that location.
So you believe it has sufficient capacity?
We're going to be reducing all the flows from our site to get to that location.
So is your testimony that it has sufficient capacity?
My testimony is that we are reducing the flow leaving our site, yes.
So you believe it has, as it exists, it has sufficient capacity, and you're going to make it so that there's less flow, so it should certainly have more.
We have not done an off-site analysis of the PennDOT, Tredyffrin Township, and Radnor Township sewer systems.
Fair enough. Do you know the diameter of that main then?
We're showing it appears to be an 18-inch corrugated metal pipe.
Does your analysis of whether or not that main has a sufficient capacity take into account the adjacent shopping center?
As I stated, we have not done an analysis of PennDOT, Tredyffrin Township, and Radnor Township's sewer system. We are reducing the amount of flow leaving our site.
Just have one more question. The neighbor plan, A4. I understand that it's been stated by a couple different witnesses now, including you, that it does not meet the code. In what ways, you don't have to go through all of them, but if you want to hit the high notes, what ways does it not meet the code?
So there's two iterations of the plan, just to complicate it. But one of the major pieces where it does not, it meets the code if the board approves open space, which is separate. The open space requirement, and we can pull up the code,
So not contiguous?
says that it should be contiguous unless approved by the board. So using that language, the board can approve it if it's not contiguous, but it has to be specifically approved by the board. So that was one piece. This has the amount of A4A included the correct amount of impervious or of open space. It had the correct percentages for stormwater, so it met the other provisions. It just did not. It did not meet the contiguous requirement of the code.
So the one code section it does not meet is that it's not contiguous, the open space?
It would meet the requirement if approved by the board.
And there's nothing else that you can think of on
In the
that neighbor, what's been called
in the
neighbor?
base plan, I believe that was the most significant. There was also a provision the neighbors had asked for an alternate on the bottom of A4A. And I don't know if you have A4A, you can pull up for everyone. But A4A had an alternative driveway configuration which had access to Eagle Road. There are code provisions that say that the driveway, if you're on a corner parcel, should take access, and you're on a major collector, should take access from the secondary street. And so the board would need to approve that specifically to allow that access.
So the access onto Eagle?
Onto Eagle. So the bottom of the page, there's an inset. And again, that's why we included it as an inset. This was a plan that was responsive to neighbor questions and comments, was that we would be able to provide that if approved by the board.
So just to understand, the purpose of this plan correct me if I'm wrong, is to provide the board an ability to come up with conditions on the plan that's shown on A12? Is that your testimony?
It was to also reflect to the neighbors that, you know, we were not ignoring their requests, right? The applicant has spent an extensive amount of time meeting with various neighbors over time, trying to come up with a plan that was a mutually agreeable plan, and that was reflected in this A4A document.
And an alternative to what you've done, bringing it in on another application, is to bring a new application, correct? With this plan?
Yes, I would defer to legal. That's more a legal question. You can have a different application with this plan, but this plan had items that didn't explicitly meet the code, like our current plan explicitly meets the code.
I have no further questions.
So it's my understanding that the neighbor parties have already had cross-examination, correct?
Yes.
So the only body that hasn't had a chance are the board members.
I
I
believe
believe
the
the
board
board
members-
also did.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Rice did say that there could be potentially cross from the neighbors, additional cross, but that was my remembrance.
There was very extensive cross by the neighbors and the board, so I would object to further. Mr. Marlier, the township's attorney, has been cross-examining Mr. Lambert. I think we took a 10-minute break, but he started in on Mr. Lambert at 6:30. It's now 8:20, so almost 2 hours. I would like to have some redirect.
Okay. Just 1 second, please.
Of course, I couldn't deny a man a bathroom break. I just got the comfy seat though. I know. What the heck's that? Shenanigans.
I think what we're going to do is, based on John's statement at the last hearing, that the neighbors would have another chance, but only on issues raised during this cross-examination. So we're not allowing, this is directed to you, the neighbors. You can't just go far off afield. You can ask questions to follow up what the township asked, but not a new area. So that being said, and recognizing how long it's been going on, I will go through the list. If you could please then come up to the microphone if you do have a question and ask it here, we'd appreciate it. So,
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
I am so sorry.
Yes.
But if I could just have a 5-minute break to go to the restroom, please.
only 2.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll resume in 5 minutes.
And, yeah, so, Ms. Atwood-Levy.
Yes, I'm here.
Are you headed to the convenience?
I was going to.
Okay, well, then be quick. Okay.
You're up front.
4-year-olds? Yeah, but my kids are both late 20s, out on their own.
Jim was saying he's got them now to pay their part of the bill.
I think we're getting my eldest, who has quite the job. I think she's
Yeah.
finally paying her part of it. So.
Well, both are both supportive. I just figured my son's getting married in June.
Yeah. I was just going to tell you you're first up, so okay.
So as soon as these guys say
soon-
just be embarrassed.
Yeah, so be ready to come on up.
We just wanted to embarrass you in front of the entire. Good. All right, we're ready to start again.
Ms. Atwood-Levy.
Amber Atwood-Levy, Radnor Conservancy. I just wanted to circle back to our quick conversation on natural stormwater management. Are you aware of the amount of stormwater that mature trees capture? Because you said on the site there wasn't currently, you weren't aware of any stormwater management that was currently occurring.
Yeah, what I said was the no structured stormwater. We had about 2 acres of impervious that are all direct runoff. And there are mature trees on the site. There are a lot of declining trees on the site, but that was the answer.
Right, but I believe that you said that you wouldn't refer to vegetation on site as stormwater management. And I just wanted to address that because deciduous trees, and this is available on a lot of places, including Penn State Extension. This is a question. This is, the question was, are you aware that trees can capture 500 to 700 gallons of water a year, and that large evergreens or conifers can capture 2 to 3 times that amount, because I think that that qualifies as a
Is that
natural
what-
stormwater management. Yes.
You asked the perfect question.
Yes.
You stop. So let him answer.
No problem.
Let him answer that question that you asked.
Okay.
Is he aware of trees capturing that much stormwater?
Can you define what you mean by capture?
Yeah, no problem. So they can absorb that, they slow that rate, they capture that, functioning very much as a engineered stormwater management system would.
So when you refer to capture in that context, I believe you're referring to like the tree actually absorbing that water from the soil and uptaking it into the tree.
That is actually, during the summer, trees transpire 80 to 100 gallons of water a day, and that's transpiration. That's not actually what I'm referring to.
So when you're saying capture, are you saying from the surface of the tree?
Yes.
So during a rainfall event, you get just attachment of water to that tree surface? Is that what you're...
There is the attachment of water to the tree surface, but also tree bark is grows in such a way to channel the rainwater down. I'm replying to his question.
I object, yes. Mr. Lambert was asking a question, she's answering it. So we're going to let this go on, but if we could circle this back around to questions, please.
So I should or should not answer.
You can explain to him. He's attempting to figure out what you mean by capture.
Yes, so the
if
rainfall...
you could circle it back around to explaining better what you mean by capture, that would be perfect.
No problem. The rainfall is directed to the roots of the tree and absorbed by the tree's roots.
So runoff coefficients take that into account when we do our pre-modeling? Take
into account...
Account the site conditions, whether it's impervious meadow, a woodland. I don't think this really qualifies as a woodland with the trees that are there.
Okay, well, I assume there is a definition of woodland? Because before you had said that the criteria
we have a wooded area, right? Again, I'm using a stormwater, looking at for your runoff coefficients for the model. The township wants us to use the preceding condition as meadow, right? And that's what we've used as the requirement. I believe your question was really related to, an individual tree. No, we did not take into account an individual tree in that calculation.
Trees, right, because there's quite a few marked for removal. So considering the amount of large canopy trees that are on this property and functioning and in this stormwater mitigation way, don't you think it would better serve our community for as much of those large canopy trees as possible to be preserved and not just rely on engineered stormwater management, because we can couple those two and have better for the flooding that is happening in our community if we can rely on
Ms.
both
Atwood,
forms? Yes.
Once again,
Yes.
you asked a great
Sorry.
question.
Yeah.
You asked a question is,
Got it.
why can't you preserve more trees or why don't you preserve more trees?
Sorry.
Why don't we let him answer that? Okay.
What was the question?
Sorry. The question was, given the benefits of the trees and the challenges our community is facing from flooding, wouldn't it better serve our community to preserve as much large canopy as possible and not just rely on engineered stormwater management?
There is a portion of the canopy which is being preserved as part of this, and we're supplementing that, obviously, with the proposed stormwater management we've talked about extensively.
Got it. Do engineered stormwater mitigation systems provide any kind of pollution filtration?
There will be some best management practice with, either vegetation through swales before it gets to inlet to provide water quality. We also have the infiltration component, getting the water back into the ground.
And is that as much as the trees that are there currently provide?
I have not done that calculation.
Okay. And are you aware that this site, while not is situated less than a mile from Gulf Creek and a mile from Little Darby Creek?
I don't know the exact dimension, but they're generally in the area, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, I'm not great at pronouncing names. Mr. Chawla, Chawla, Chawla? Okay, Mr. Clementi. No question. Thank you, sir. Mr. Curley? Not here. Mr. Gato? Not here. Mr. Harrison? Sorry, Hanson? No question. Thank you. Mr. Holloway? No question. Thank you. Mr. Heimel? Ms. Lafarge? Ms. Mahoney? No questions, thank you. Ms. Peckett? Peckett? P-E-C-H-E-T? Not here. Ms. Rushman? Ms. Sareen? Mr. Scatterfield? Mr. Sherry?
Steve Sherry, 9 Grant Lane, Radnor. Just a couple questions, Mr. Lambert. If we can go, and I think you've seen the sheet enough that you're fully aware, A12-4, the original, it's simple question.
Okay, go ahead.
I know you know the answer, I hope. On that, you said that there's a 25-foot buffer with a 5-foot extra inclusion to meet code for a total of 30 feet from the property lines on Grant Lane to the nearest townhome. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Looking at whatever we're calling this one, A4A, what is the distance from the property line on Grant Lane to the homes?
To the homes, about 85 feet to the property line.
85 feet, thank you. Using A4A, is there additional stormwater management on this plan along the Grant Lane compared to A12A, which is relying on natural swells?
Yes, there's a stormwater system behind units 15 through 18.
Okay. Concerning, I think I put my glasses on, whatever we're calling the left road, I think that's Road B.
It's not labeled on this, but yes, the road to the left.
It's the one to the left. Drive, okay, sorry. It's not a street, it's not a road, it's a drive. In this plan, comparison to A12-4, is the entrance further up Stratford than it was on the previous one?
Yes.
Again, looking at the traffic, is there a stop sign at the corner of Grant Lane and Stratford Ave?
Yes.
By moving this exit, does it improve the sight line to the stop sign on Stratford Ave, in your opinion?
There's more straight-of-way in this section, so the sight line will be improved in this location.
On A12-4, with where the drive is proposed, do you have a rough approximation of the distance from that exit to the stop sign in car lengths?
I do not know that number.
Would it be fair to say about 2 car lengths? 2 to 3?
From drive, let me be sure I'm understanding the question. From the westernmost drive on A12 sheet 4 to the stop sign at Grant?
Correct.
It appears that there would be at least 10 car lengths between the stop sign and drive A.
I think that's a little overstated, but
There's 30 feet between the property. I'll tell you how I'm approximating it. There's 30 feet between the property line and the rear of Unit 20. Unit 20 is 56 feet deep, so that's 86. The driveway's 20, so I have 106. The sidewalk's 5, so I have about 110. And it looks like the Mary Ann Mahoney's property is of a similar depth, car length using the township parking standards, 20 feet. So we have kind of 5 to 6 on our side, 5 to 6 on our side, and 5 to 6 on the other side is how I approximated it.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question concerning where are we at, A4A. With the 85 feet, let's for lack of a better word, setback, I know it's not a setback, but the distance, would that allow for more mature trees to be put in to improve the sight lines for those living on Grant Lane so that the homes that you are proposing to build would be less visible?
There would be more landscaping there. The maturity of the tree may not change, but there will be more landscaping.
But you would have more room to put in larger trees, is that?
You will have more room between the property line and the units.
Thank you.
Ms. Sherry? Mr. Shuda?
Joe Shuda, 14 Forest Lane. Couple questions for Mr. Lambert. First, I want to ask regarding, I believe it's Drive B. I can't make it out. The one closest to, oh, thank you.
Hang on, I was actually going to bring up the right exhibit. Just give me 1 second.
The one close to Eagle Road, whatever that drive is.
There you go.
Let's drive here.
Drive B.
Drive B. Okay, Drive B. You testified in your testimony that Drive B, that radius on that turn could accommodate certain vehicles. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would it possibly accommodate standard tractor trailers, 53 feet to be exact in length for the trailer?
I believe we looked at a WB40 tractor trailer, and that maneuvers through there.
I'm sorry?
We looked at a WB40 tractor trailer, which was able to maneuver through.
So it could?
Yes.
Okay, great. You also testified regarding the stormwater system, that the HOA would have maintenance responsibilities once the system is installed and the HOA is in charge of the facility?
Yes.
In that circumstance, would that, and this may not be a question for Mr. Lambert, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pose it, but will that HOA responsibility be spelled out in the sale plan for these homes, do you know?
I believe it, as part of our NPDS permit, there will be a document recorded.
Okay.
And it's my understanding, I'm not an attorney, that those recorded documents become of record to the property when it's sold.
Thank you. And with respect to the stormwater system itself, any water, all the water, runoff water, is going to be collected by the system, is that correct?
I don't like to use the word all, but a large majority of the water will be collected, yes.
All right. So will any of that water be subject to absorption by normal ground? If it doesn't go into the retention system, will it go into groundwater?
Yes, so we have, both the infiltration components of the stormwater systems, which will potentially put it back into groundwater, but you just also have all the areas shown in green on A12-4 are really landscaped areas, right? Mm-hmm. So that water will, the water from the sky lands on the landscaped areas.
So do you have an idea about approximately how much water will go into the actual Forest Lane? Percentage-wise, would 50% go into Forest Lane and the rest would be absorbed by this normal percolation?
I'm not sure what we're making a percentage of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
if you could tell me what are we comparing it to?
Well, currently there's no system, so whatever flows or whatever rain accumulates.
So we're reducing the rates running off, from, the systems provide a reduction in those rates. I can go back over the numbers if you like, but we had both the post-development condition using the township standards. We had provided, I believe it was A15, which was the question we get, and you've posed it to me,
Right.
is what happens in actual condition, not in this made-up condition of
Right.
meadow, but what happens today versus what happens in the future, and that showed drastic reductions in the amount of runoff.
Okay. And okay, so well, that'll be all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Silver? Mr. Scary?
Gregory Zari, 6 Forest Lane. Regarding the stormwater management system, can you tell us, you used the term outflow, can you tell us what the difference is between outflow and overflow regarding a stormwater management system?
So the outflow is there's an outlet structure, which will have various orifices, holes in that structure to allow water out at a metered rate.
And is it related in some way to overflow?
So I believe where we were discussing overflow, there was a question about having a extreme storm event, right? As you have this storm event that exceeds any township requirement, again, just for the record, that you get this 500,000-year storm, where would the water go and would the systems overflow? I point out that if we did not put any of these systems in, we would have all of that runoff running downhill. Right now, with these systems, we'll have some collection, some control of those extreme events, and then after the systems reach their capacity in this fictitious storm, that water will, we've filled up all the systems. Where does the water go? And my answer to that was that water will run downhill.
Okay, so then overflow might be construed as surface water, and outflow would be construed as water below grade managed by the systems.
I'd say controlled, right? So we have that outflow, our outlets are controlled, and in this instance, it is controlled in a pipe, yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you state that a study of the existing storm sewer that you're going to be connecting to was not performed? And what I'm talking about is the storm sewer in Forest Lane.
Correct. I said that my testimony was that we have not studied the PennDOT, Tredyffrin Township, and Radnor Township sewer lines for that system. And as you're aware, that system is, connected to all of those.
Okay, and are you aware of the history of flooding that has occurred on Forest Lane and Grant Lanes?
It has been relayed to me. I do not know all the specifics of it, but some of the flooding has been relayed to me, yes.
So you're saying that you're designing a stormwater management system that ties into a municipal storm sewer system, and you have no idea whether it can manage that outflow or not?
My testimony was that the proposed stormwater on this site reduces the amount of runoff reaching that current municipal system.
That's not my question. My question is, you're designing a storm sewer system that's connecting to a municipal storm sewer system, and you don't know if that system can handle the outflow of your storm sewer system.
And so I have the same answer my answer is that we have less water getting there post-development than we do pre-development.
That's commendable. However, the water that does leave the site, you have no idea whether the storm sewer that you're connecting to can conduct that water away.
So we have a pre-development condition where all this water gets to that location, to that same collection system. We are reducing the amount of water getting to that collection system.
Again, that's still not answering my question.
Could you try to rephrase the question to get it the answer, you know, get a response you're looking for?
All right. The system that you're designing has an outflow, and a certain amount of water exits that outflow, correct?
Correct.
Is that calculable?
Yes.
Is it calculable to know whether the storm sewer system you're connecting to in Forest Lane can handle that outflow?
So there's two pieces of the question there. One would be, what do you mean by handle? And the second would be is that stormwater is part of a much larger network of pipes.
Mr. Lambert, have you done any studies or measurements of the capacity of the storm sewer system you will be connected to?
I believe I testified that we have not done the study of the PennDOT, Tredyffrin, and Radnor sewer system.
So since you have not done the study, you're assuming, based on the fact that you feel your system was going to provide less water is going to end up going to this system than currently goes to the system, ergo, the system has the capacity.
I'm saying that our site has an existing volume and a rate of runoff that leaves it during a 100-year storm event. And our calculations show from actual conditions, again, I'm making that code distinction, from actual conditions is we're reducing it by about 50% for a 100-year storm. So we're cutting our rate of runoff during an extreme storm event in basically half.
And do you know currently actual conditions, can the municipal system handle a 100-year storm?
I've not done the study of the PennDOT, Tredyffrin, and Radnor sewer systems.
I recognize that, but do you have any information that the system currently overflows during large storm events, such as a 100-year storm?
I do not know what storm event it overflows in.
Do you know if it overflows, if it has overflowed in any storm event in the last 10 years?
I believe it has, and some of those storm events may not be classified as a 100-year storm, but it's really about the rate that the water is coming down, is
the speed that it's entering the system.
The speed that is entering the system.
Yeah. Does that address your concerns, sir?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have just a couple more questions, and it's relative to the testimony you had just given in response to cross-exam by the very first individual. You had mentioned that there are a percentage of trees that are going to be retained on the site. Do you know what that percentage is?
I don't have the percentage of trees.
I'm sorry?
I do not have the percentage of trees.
Okay. Are you aware that the demolition plan marked Exhibit A4 shows approximately 381 trees on the site?
I do not have the number.
Are you aware that the demolition plan shows 254 of those trees are going to be removed from the site?
I did not do the calculation.
Okay. Do you realize that that's approximately 2/3 of all of the trees on the site?
If those two numbers come out to 2/3, I suspect that's what the number is.
Okay. I understand. No, that's getting out of your testimony. I'm sorry. I think that's all that I have at this point.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Willis? No question. Mrs. Willis? No. And last but not least, Ms. Lutz. Okay. Mr. Brosman, you said you had some redirect?
Yes. Would I be able to borrow your mic, Noah?
Of course, George.
Thank you. What's that?
Do you want the?
Not yet. Or do you need to get it ready?
I can. It takes me a second. That's fine.
Yeah, get it ready. So Mr. Lambert has been testifying, I think, for 3 hearings, cross-examined by a lot of those. So my notes go back through all of those. So I might be asking something that didn't occur tonight, but it was a question he was asked on cross-examination at another time. So
Understood.
I just wanted to explain that I've been keeping notes all this time. Mr. Lambert, at the very beginning, when you were being qualified and accepted as a witness, the township's attorney, Mr. Marlier, asked you about projects that you had in Radnor Township that involved properties over 7 acres, and I think your response was, you know, there weren't many properties that big, but did you think of any additional properties in Radnor that you've worked on that have been over 7 acres since that time?
Yes, I think we talked about, Cabrini University. We've done work there for many years. Eastern University, there's the former Valley Forge military parking lot, which is now 18 residential homes on 24 acres, I believe it was, or around 20 acres, 22 acres. Across the street from that at Valley Forge Military Academy, we did what's now known as the Oak Hill Project. It's a senior living for 300 residents on 24 acres. Just to kind of name a few right there in that same circle.
And those senior dwellings, they included quite a few independent living dwelling units, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And I think Mr. Marlier also asked that you had projects with over 30 dwelling units. Obviously, you just mentioned Oak Hill with 300. Have you done other projects with over 30 dwelling units at other locations?
Yes, either that or close to that. There's some mixed-use projects we're currently working on in the township that are over that number. Outside of the township, there's many. We've done a lot of mixed-use projects with 100, 150 units. We've done townhouse developments with 123 units. So we're familiar with the larger developments. His questions were specific, I think, to Radnor. Radnor didn't have that many projects in my tenure that were over that number.
I believe it was Mr. Rice, when he was cross-examining you at a prior hearing, asked you a question with the implication that, I think his words were, would the entire site be bulldozed? Can you address that?
I would just object to the characterization of cross-examination. Mr. Rice has asked 2 or 3 questions the entire time. In my opinion, just to simply clarify or get a little more information.
So noted. Thank you.
It's been more than that.
So I'll use Exhibit A12, Sheet 5. There was a question about earth moving. I think it was a multi-part question. The area that's shown actually with a kind of a solid line with a couple dashes is the limit of disturbance line. And so you can see there's actually about an acre in the middle of the site that really remains undisturbed from a development standpoint. There's about a 1/4 acre close to Eagle and Stratford. Again, that remains. And then there's an area along Grant, a smaller area that is outside of that area of disturbance. So we have, what is that, an acre and a quarter, a little over an acre and a quarter that's undisturbed.
So it would not be accurate to say the entire site would be bulldozed?
That's correct.
And if a similar townhouse plan would be prepared, would this have any greater amount of disturbance or earth moving than a typical townhome plan for this development?
No, it would not.
In your opinion, would a non-density modification single-family development plan even have more disturbance than a plan like this?
Yeah, a single-family plan would likely disturb the entire site, as you wouldn't have the open space area, so you'd be building individual homes likely in that area.
I think one of Mr. Rice's question was, and maybe Mr. Marlier cleared it up, so I don't want to be repetitive, but Mr. Rice was asking if all the drives were a minimum of 19 feet by 20. I believe you clarified that tonight. Is it accurate to say that all drives are a minimum of 19 feet by 20 feet?
Yes, they're a minimum of 19 by 20.
And many are bigger?
Yes.
In your, strike that. You were asked about the fire truck that you used, and if you met at this stage with the fire marshal. In the conditional use standards for density modification development, is there a requirement to review plans with a fire marshal?
No, there's not.
You mentioned you've done a lot of other projects in Radnor that went through land development and permitting. Did you have occasion to review those plans with the township fire marshal?
Much later in the process. It wouldn't be during a conditional, it wasn't during the conditional use phase.
And when you did that, were you given guidance as to what size fire truck to use?
Yes, and that's the same fire truck we've used on this application.
Mr. Rice, in one of his questions, asked you about the single-family plan that we had submitted. I believe it was just a concept because the question had come up when Mr. Rice was questioning Mr. Howder. I think that was at exhibit...
A16?
Correct, A16. That was a concept. Mr. Rice asked you, did you know if the driveways would be permitted on Eagle Road? Are you aware of the development just across the street that was originally the property at 205 Stratford?
Yes, I am.
And was that approved by the township?
Yes, it was.
And were there new homes built there with driveways to Eagle Road?
Yes, they had direct access to Eagle Road.
And that was approved by the township?
Yes.
The issue came up in several questions from several people about whether, and it came up again tonight, whether the project should have internal streets under the township subdivision and land development ordinance for standards for streets. And you gave your opinion as to why you believed that didn't apply, and those opinions were also in the response letters that we made part of the record?
Yes, they are.
In addition to that, are you familiar with numerous communities that are served by common internal drives?
Yes.
And can you describe some of those in the area generally?
Yeah, so after this came up, we started to take a closer look at other developments in the community and how they've been interpreted, just to see, what was, how they function today. And we looked at a lot of them. The one on the north side of Eagle, going up Eagle, the north side of or east side of the train tracks. There was obviously Villa Stratford we talked about. The ones we mentioned earlier tonight during the beginning of the cross-examination down kind of in West Wayne area. And we started looking at all those driveways. And, all of the sites we looked at they weren't streets, right? They don't meet the street requirement. They didn't have the width. They didn't have a proper turnaround at the end, right? They didn't have a cul-de-sac bulb. They didn't have the right geometry as far as centerline geometry. So, none of the ones that we saw would actually meet the street requirements out of any of the developments that we looked at. So going back to that is the code, I think, was pretty clear that there's, and I pull up the section that I believe it was 255-40 was for the multifamily, the multifamily and attached dwelling residential development, seeing all the properties that have varying ages, and they all seem to have driveways. They did not have access that would be qualified as a street. The 255-40 made a lot of sense. I know there was questions early on about the ordinance section and how that would apply, but that really started to make sense that the township has looked at it as a driveway with access and circulation. It was planned for convenient circulation, suitable for traffic needs, et cetera, in the 255-40 section.
And I would like you to put up on the screen Exhibit A25. Is this a summary of some of the properties you looked at?
Yeah, this is,
I would object to any documents being brought in at this time. They had a chance, they had their direct examination. It seems like we're past that point.
If I could respond, this was a issue that was brought up about streets, and we should have an opportunity to present evidence as to how similar communities, which Mr. Marlier himself brought up at the very beginning of the testimony this evening. He asked about these specific communities, and we should be permitted the opportunity to put this evidence forward.
Yeah, no, the objection's overruled.
so this is just a couple, right? I said I looked at a lot of them. I got to drive around on a freezing day. So this was Villa Stratford, and these are arranged in kind of a first sheet of summary, a few pictures, and I'll go quickly given the
And there are page numbers, so for the record, they're little on the bottom, if you could refer to those.
Yep. So we have Exhibit A25. This is sheet 1. So this is Villa Stratford, 115 Stratford Avenue. Just some general property comments. It's an R4 density modification development with 11 townhouse units, and it's on a 2.1 acre site. There's 3 common driveways, and this question's come up a couple times during the initial testimony is, how do you end up naming these? Where do you name them, right? So this is a perfect example. Villa Stratford Lane, Madison Lane, and Lincoln Lane. So there's actually 3 lanes, even though it's part of a private HOA. The lanes are all named in there. The driveway widths are 22 feet, so it would be substandard for a street, but it would meet the drive, or actually I think it's less than some of the driveway requirements. And there's a sidewalk on one side. The units have individual addresses on their driveway, and they kind of have a common mailbox. So going to sheet 2.
Before you leave that, there's a sidewalk on one side of Villa Stratford, and you can show this in the photo, so I won't belabor it, but not on the other drives, correct?
Correct.
And I think Mr. Rice and maybe some others asked, and we explained this would happen later in the process, but how do you get an address on a driveway? And do you recall there's a person that the township has granted party status to? Her name is on the list here that Mr. Rice gave me, Jennifer Packett, Pecht. She's spoken here, and she lives at Villa Stratford. The address on Mr. Rice's list is 3 Madison Lane. Do you remember her speaking?
I do.
So she has an address for her unit on the driveway that's called Madison Lane, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, keep going.
So this is an aerial photograph.
Page 2.
On page 2. You can see let's see here, the bottom of the page is Lancaster Avenue. There are 4 buildings that are perpendicular to Lancaster Avenue. You can see that you have Villa Stratford Lane as labeled. It's just a Google Earth image. Villa Stratford Lane going into the site, and then you have Madison Lane, and I believe it was Lincoln Lane, that are perpendicular or roughly perpendicular to Villa Stratford Lane. So the resident that you just talked to lived in the first set of buildings there is Madison Lane. And if I go to sheet 3, this is a kind of an inset of the record plan. This shows the driveway entering the site, the main drive. You have the 2 other driveways. As Mr. Brosman pointed out, there is a sidewalk along one side of the main drive going into the site. The driveways between the units, really, accessing the units, does not have any sidewalk entering that. So there's no sidewalk on either side of that. This property, I just point out, as I looked at it, kind of the standards of the street that we talked about was, does it have a cul-de-sac? No, it doesn't have a cul-de-sac. Did it have the appropriate width? No, it does not have the appropriate width. Does it have the right-of-way? No, it won't have a 60-foot right-of-way. So there's lots of requirements that would say that it was a street that this would have to have, and this has none of them. This is just a picture inside showing a picture of the site showing the street signs.
Page 4.
Page 4. It has you can see the backside of a stop sign there. There was a question about what happens when you have private driveways with any traffic control signage. There was a question about that at a previous hearing, so this shows that it gets installed. Sheet 5, this is the group mailbox at Villa Stratford. So they have mail that goes to one location. Again, that was a question from Mr. Rice of how they get mail, and I believe one of the commissioners also asked that question. The next development was 237 West Wayne Avenue, Jardin. I believe this was the former Adelberg Florist site. It's an R5 residence district. There's 6 townhouse units with an office building in the front. It was built about 2014. There's a common driveway width of 20 feet, starting at the mailbox, which I'll point out. There's no sidewalks along the common drive, and they have common mailboxes. Again, these were just trying to address questions that came up during previous meetings. Whoops. So I'm going to go to, I believe I'm up to sheet 7 of A25. So again, this is an aerial photograph. West Wayne Avenue is on the bottom, going lower left, a little bit up to the middle right. Conestoga Road is going from the kind of upper middle left to the middle bottom. You can see there's a driveway access on West Wayne Avenue. The building that's closest to the corner is an office building with associated surface parking around it, and that it has a 20-foot driveway going up the side of the office building, and in between the two buildings in the back, there's a little pin that says 237 West Wayne Avenue on one of the buildings. There is access to the garages of the units with a driveway between them. So sheet 8, this is the record plan. Again, it shows the same layout and same orientation as the previous slide. It shows the driveways. One thing I would point out on this is the geometry of this does not meet any street standard, right? It wouldn't be considered a street. There's no turnaround. There's the curvature at the end with kind of a zigzag does not meet any of the standards, and it's also a dead end. Slide 9, this is a photograph looking in with my back toward West Wayne Avenue. On the left-hand side is the office building. You can see the condos or townhouses in the rear. This is looking down the common driveway. You can see the mailboxes on the left-hand side. This is a picture. My back would now be facing the office building, looking between the two buildings. So you have a townhouse building on the right and a townhouse building on the left. You can see that they have kind of small driveways leading to their garages. There are some cars parked in those areas, and then you have common parking down at the end of the driveway.
When you were there, Mr. Lambert, and the photo on page 10, did you notice any trash cans in the individual unit driveways?
Yes. At the time, it must have been trash day. I think there were some trash cans out at the time.
In front of the garages?
Yes. You can't really see it in the picture, but they were up closer to the garage. Sheet 11 is 123 Bloomingdale Avenue, R5 residence district. There's 5 homes. There's 3 townhome units and 2 single-family homes. It was built around 2019. The common driveway width is 21 feet. There's a sidewalk on one side of that common driveway, and this one actually had individual mailboxes for each unit. Again, this is an aerial photograph, sheet 12, that shows Bloomingdale, which is labeled going left to right. And you can see roughly in the kind of middle left is the actual site. You can see the driveway going into a T configuration. There's a larger townhouse building in the rear with 2 single-family dwellings out closer to Bloomingdale. Sheet 13, this is a portion of the record plan for the site, again showing the driveway, the sidewalk on one side of the driveway going into the site, and then the driveway going back in between the units of the front and back buildings. Sheet 14, this is a photograph on Bloomingdale looking into the site. You can see on the left and the right are the individual dwellings, the single-family dwellings with the townhouses in the rear. You can see the driveway with the sidewalk going up the right-hand side. So Wicklow Court, this is sheet 15, West Wayne Avenue. This is almost directly across the street from the Jardin site that we referenced before. R5 Residence District, 8 townhouse units built in 2013. There's a common driveway width of 25 feet, no sidewalks along the common driveway, group mailbox, and the common driveway has the name of Wicklow Court. Sheet 16, the site is circled roughly on the page. The right-hand side is Keith Martin Electric and the former restaurant at the corner, which are not part of this site. But you can see where Wicklow Court is. There's 3 residential buildings. There's a common parking area with garages alongside. Sheet 17, this is the record plan for the Wicklow Court development. Again, showing the configuration of the parking driveway and units. Sheet 18, this is a photograph of the Wicklow Court development. You can actually see a street sign on the left-hand side right at the top there. You can see it's a brick paver area, looks very nice, but it's a driveway accessing these units. I don't know if there's actually common trash right out by the street there. Oh, there you can see the common trash, and you see a common mailbox on sheet 19.
Now, did you also see some projects with more units?
Yes, we could probably go on all night going over the projects, but there's a little further from the sites that we just talked about, across the street was Conestoga, I believe it's Graythorn, has many more units. Again, the geometry there, that one actually had a little bit better circulation. It was a loop, so it wasn't a dead end like many of the ones that we've looked at. But the geometry of the driveway would be nowhere near what a street would be required. You have grades and geometry, so it wouldn't meet any of those requirements. There's a larger development, I believe it's Ironworks Way. Again, it's behind the Land Rover dealer on Lancaster Avenue. Again, it's a long dead end. It's a driveway. It accesses the parking there, given that that's a little different configuration of units, but it falls under the same ordinance requirement. And so that was a driveway accessing that. There's no turnaround, no cul-de-sac. The driveway width was substandard also, so or it wouldn't be a street standard, I should say.
And would it be accurate to say that Graythorn Woods has 49 units? Does that refresh your recollection?
Yeah, I was going to guess around 50, but yes, 49, I'll go with it.
And any idea how many Pembroke North?
I think it's somewhere in that same number. I think it was around 50.
Now, can you compare generally the all of these access drives that you've seen when you looked at all of these properties with the access drives, common access drives that are proposed on this plan, Exhibit A12, Sheet 4, does this plan have advantages over those as far as better circulation?
Yeah, when you look at the ordinance requirement of 25540, there's the two sections. C was access and circulation, and E was driveways. And there's several sections that talk about the kind of convenient access. And I believe the proposed plan on A12 Sheet 4 is far superior to all the developments we talked about with the ease of access, convenience, of circulation through the site. We don't have a dead end. We have a kind of a U-shape, whether it's for, it talks about trash and service to the buildings. We have, a much better access and service to this site in this configuration.
And this common driveway on this proposed plan is wider than all of those common driveways?
Yes, it was.
And there was no project you saw that had sidewalks on both sides of the common driveways?
That is correct.
And some had none?
Some had none.
And many of those had one driveway access, only one driveway access to the adjoining public street, and this plan has two, correct?
That is correct.
In your opinion, is that better?
One correction. The development on the east side of, it's not one that we went over specifically, but the east side of the railroad tracks on Eagle Road has a one-way access from Eagle Road. So it would kind of have two, but that one was very substandard. So I'm not sure I would want to compare that one.
Is it better generally for access and emergency access to have two driveways to the public street as compared to one?
It would be superior, I think, from the access, circulation, turning movements, all of the above.
Tonight, Mr. Marlier was asking about, he's been calling it the Hamilton 1 plan, the prior
Mr.
conditional.
Bozeman,
Yes.
before you get started, considering the lateness of the hour, how much more do you have? Is this a good time to break?
I'd like to wrap up. I maybe can do it in 5 minutes.
Okay. I won't hold you
I've
exactly
challenged
to that,
myself.
but I'll hold you.
Yeah, I'm at night 3. I'm ready. Let's wrap this one up.
I'm sorry to tell you, but you will be recrossed by all the parties.
Okay.
Sorry.
Make it even 4.
I don't want to get your hopes up.
Mr. Lambert, Mr. Marlier was asking you about differences between the Hamilton 1 plan. You may not have touched this, but as compared to the Hamilton 1 plan, does the plan at Exhibit A12 now have all the required common open space as one contiguous area?
Yes, it does.
And one of the reasons the prior board denied the Hamilton 1 plan was they said that only the area in the central they were going to count, and they weren't going to count the other areas, correct?
Yes, I believe that was their decision.
You were asked if the common open space contained any floodplain or wetlands, and you said no. But to clarify the record, the entire property has no floodplain or wetlands, is that correct?
That is correct.
In your experience, is it common for stormwater management facilities to be underneath common open space?
Yes, and active recreation, for that matter, can go over stormwater management. We design it under athletic fields routinely.
And even under, if it's not required common open space, under lawn areas?
Yes,
How about under parking areas?
routinely designed under both lawn or paved areas.
To clarify, you were asked about the footprints of the units. I think you said this, but just to clarify, the brown areas on sheet 4 of Exhibit A12 shown at 36 by 56 feet. That's the maximum size of the unit, correct?
That is correct.
So they won't be any larger than that.
That is correct.
And any decks or things of that nature would be within that area.
Correct.
And Code Section 280.135.c, which are some of the general conditional use standards, specifically says you don't have to have a final architectural plan at the conditional use phase, correct?
That is correct.
You were asked about the distances of units 16 through 20 to Grant Lane. The units 16 through 20, the minimum distance is 30 feet, correct?
That is correct.
Some of the units, particularly 19 and 17, have a slightly greater setback because that's where the facade varies.
Correct.
And of course, units 15, 14, and 13, they're kind of in the general Grant Lane area, but they have much greater setbacks from the Grant Lane property line, correct?
Correct.
Are there any conditional use standards for density modification that govern the distance between individual driveway units for townhomes?
No, there's not.
Density modification allows townhomes to be up to 6 in a row, correct?
That is correct.
And this plan only has one row with up to 6, is that right?
Yes.
So by allowing units up to 6, you could have more driveways closer to one another than are shown on all the other smaller building types, correct?
Yes, and I'd point out that these are wide units. If you had a narrower unit, the driveways would likely be closer together.
You were asked about things like delivery vehicles and snow removal. In your professional opinion, does having this width of this driveway, which is wider than the other driveways you observed in other attached or multifamily communities, does that help address that issue practically as well?
Yes.
And how is that?
Just a wider driveway if a vehicle, we all experience Amazon and UPS and everybody else stopping along the edge. This is a much wider driveway that cars would be able to circulate around.
Do the conditional use standards for density modification require having a plan showing ADA, Americans with Disabilities, access requirements?
No, it does not.
And that is typically handled at land development or permitting phase?
Yes.
Is there a specific requirement in the conditional use standards for a snow removal area?
I don't believe in the standards, no.
You were asked about crosswalks going across the Drive A and Drive B. Are there any conditional use code requirements for that type of thing?
No, there's not.
In your experience, is it typical for people to walk across driveways when getting to various features, whether they be open space, municipal buildings, stores, things of those nature?
Yes, and in a development this size, I actually lived in a development that had 83 units, and we did not have any crosswalks. And the decade that I lived there, there was never a problem crossing the driveway.
You were asked how many main houses were on the property. I think you may have said 2, but as I look at sheet 2 of A12, I think I see at least 3 main houses and other structures.
In my testimony,
Sound
there are
right?
2 houses. There were other structures that had dwellings associated with them, so there's lots of larger structures on site.
In your experience in doing many developments over the years, is it common for fire trucks to have to cross over lanes of either streets or driveways when they're making their turns,
Yes, very common.
even on public streets?
Yes.
You mentioned you worked on a project in Radnor with 300 units with one access to a public street,
There was one main access, yes.
one main access. Do conditional use standards for a density modification have requirements for fire hydrants?
No, they do not.
Are fire hydrants usually dealt with at land development or permitting?
Yes.
Are you aware of any code provisions that would prohibit earth disturbance in a common open space or otherwise if it was necessary to maintain a stormwater management system?
No, the open space provision actually provides for up to 10% to include stormwater. So I believe it also acknowledges that you would have to maintain said stormwater.
You were asked about specifics about stormwater management tests and things like that, infiltration tests. In the review letters that you received from the township engineering consultants, they had stormwater management comments in them, didn't they?
They did.
And did they put you on notice of the type of issues that the township's attorney was bringing up tonight?
They did not. And again, the technical stormwater, as we've mentioned before, will be further reviewed during land development, permitting, and the MPDS permit. So there'll be lots of people reviewing that as we move forward past this conditional use.
There was discussion about if there was this hypothetical 500-year storm, which is not regulated by the township, that if the system, I think the word used was overflowed, and you explained how the system might capture the water. In your opinion, if that were to happen, does that mean the system failed?
No.
And can you explain that?
Well, the system's designed for a 100-year storm, so it would be reaching its capacity and just being over capacity.
And if that fictional 500-year storm came down upon the site, today without this development, would more water go downhill? You mentioned the water would go downhill than would if we did this development and we did this stormwater management system?
Yes, the stormwater management system would, we have the volume that we're holding back before it would reach that capacity.
And what's been your general experience, the time, number of years you've been working with underground stormwater management systems, inspecting them, and how have they functioned over the years in your experience?
So I guess over the last 5 years or so, some municipalities actually require annual inspection or semi-annual inspections of the stormwater system. So we not only get to design them, hear from residents after they're installed or clients after they're installed, but also we now have to follow up on them. And we have not seen any major failures of systems. We have not seen the systems themselves, as was being suggested before, have failures where, there are sometimes issues are kind of on an inlet that's very easy to maintain, clean out, be able to remove the debris from it to allow the water into the system. But the systems themselves have not failed, and we've gone into large diameter systems, so a large pipe and actually gone down in them. And some of the systems were 15 or 20 years old or a little longer, and were still functioning and had no substantive issues.
And of course, as you mentioned, there'll be a document recorded that requires the proper maintenance, inspection, and repair in the event that something like that would happen.
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Brosman, you're well over your 5 minutes.
All right,
How much-
I got one more,
Okay.
and then I'll thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mr. Zari asked you about the trees, and Mr. Panzak, our landscape architect, will be talking about that. But when he was giving you the numbers, that you don't know if the numbers he used involved trees that were dead or declining or were invasive species when he was saying how many might be removed?
No, I did not count the trees, and I don't know how he established that number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Lambert, as I said, you are subject to re-cross-examination by both the township and the objecting parties, and the board may have some further questions for you. We are looking for our next dates. The two nights that we would like to put forward in April are the 17th and 30th.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought we were letting the cross that you said was up.
No, he's going to have to come back another night for that, yes.
Can't we just do it now?
Yeah.
We've had so many nights of Mr. Lambert coming back.
We're over 3 hours in. In my experience, things kind of go downhill from after
Yeah.
about 3 hours, so,
And I
yeah.
think I will object to further cross, but for the record, he's been crossed
Objection
for
noted
hours.
and overruled. I think since he was on redirect, it's perfectly appropriate to allow cross-examination only on the areas that he was redirected on. So going back to scheduling the next hearing, we're looking at April 17th and April 30th. I believe that works for a majority of the board. It works for Mr. Rice, although he vastly prefers the 17th. It works for the township. I think the question is, does it work for you, Mr. Brosman, and your witness?
We're checking.
I have a conflict, but I should be able to resolve it.
We can go off the record, yes.
So we think, okay?
Yeah, I'll work.
You're good for both, Mr. Brosman?
Yeah, are my other witnesses, what was the other date, the 17th and the 30th?
30th, yes.
Is anybody in my group not available for either? Could you raise your hand? You're okay. I think we're okay for both dates.
Does the board want to have both dates in April, or are we just looking for one?
I think we should probably book both.
Okay,
We might not need it, that would be great.
so, yeah.
Always an optimist.
So why, Mr. Lambert, you good for both, or is one better?
I have conflicts on both nights, but I will figure them out.
Okay, great. That being said, if Mr. Lambert is overly optimistic, I will, if you can have your other witnesses available and Township have your witnesses ready to go, we can always bring back Mr. Lambert at another night when he is available for hopefully a very short session. So, that being said, we...
Can you announce on the record the exact time and location?
Yes,
and dates?
I can do that. So we are continuing this hearing to the April 17th, which is a
Wednesday.
Wednesday, April 17th, and
Tuesday, the 30th.
Tuesday the 30th. Both nights to start at 6:30 here at the
PM.
Township Building. Mr. Brosman, I don't think we're running into any sort of time issues, but I believe John's asked you in this past, and I'm going to re-ask you. No, you're willing to waive any possible timing requirements of the MPC, such as the 45 days between hearings and the 100 days to complete your first
Yes,
your case.
I want to clarify, it's obvious, but I say it every time, that it's 6:30 PM and for the two hearings, and I'm okay with the timing of the hearings with the times of the MPC.
Waiving those things.
I'm waiving that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. You should be seeing Mr. Rice at these next ones. I've enjoyed my night here greatly, but he really misses you, so he'll be back.
Thanks for being here. All right, motion to adjourn. Second? Got it.
And obviously,